Welcome to the Recruiter Startup Podcast. My name's Dualta, and in this podcast series, I will be speaking to advisors, investors, recruiters, and entrepreneurs who are based all over the world, and we will be discussing how to set up, scale, and operate a world-class recruitment company. We also talk to a lot of independent operators, people who are working for themselves and have chosen not to scale their business. And that's what I'm doing today. I'm speaking to Aaron Thomas, and he's based in Brisbane. So he does a lot of digital transformation and technology recruitment in Queensland, in Brisbane. And we had a great chat. He has worked for a couple of large firms. So we kind of went through his experience of that and what led him to setting up his own practice. And he went through a few tips and tricks on how you can make more money being an independent operator without hiring lots of staff. And I hope you all really enjoy. Brisbane's a great place, and he also made it clear that it's changed dramatically from a business perspective. It used to be very reliant on the resources sector, but the government in Australia has put a lot of money into creating a startup scene there. And more people are choosing to move from Sydney and Melbourne and relocate up to Brisbane, where it's a bit more affordable. The weather is always nice, and the infrastructure is all in place now for it to be a really cool business hub. So it was interesting getting into that, especially because I've been there myself. And I've lived in Perth for a long time, and they're very similar cities, Perth and Brisbane. So it was nice to see how IT recruitment has changed and evolved, and how the cities have as well. We had a great old chat on all of that. I just love getting Australian guests on. So if you're a listener out there in Australia and you've founded a recruitment company, or maybe you're a recruiter abroad, hit us up and come on the podcast for an old chat and tell me what the crack is.
Can you hear me now?
Hi, Aaron.
Good. Yeah, we're coming through clear.
We are loud and clear. Welcome to the Recruiter Startup Podcast.
Thanks, mate. Welcome to. Thanks for having me.
Welcome to where? Where are you welcoming me to?
Mate, yeah, I'm sitting in our office here in Brisbane CBD. It's a little bit later, but it's a nice muggy Brisbane Monday evening.
Am I keeping you in the office later?
Mate, I've got a 5-month-old, so it was stay in the office and do this, or maybe have a few interruptions. So it was. It's probably better for your recording if I came into the office and did it. So,
yeah, I'm juggling similar issues myself with midterm coming up. The nursery closing down next week is terrifying.
Okay, yeah. So that's been good. It's our first one. So she's just turned 5 months. So it's we're learning on the job, but it's been good. It's been a good balancing act, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've done 2 in 2 years, so it's been pretty full on. So
yeah,
the first was handy enough, and then when we added another one to the mix,
we'll be. I think we'll wait. We probably won't go that fast. Hopefully, so we're but you never know. You never know your luck.
So you a Brisbane boy, born and bred?
Yeah, for most of my working career, definitely. I've spent some time in Sydney. I grew up in Sydney. So if you ask me what sporting teams I support, I'm probably more of a Sydney sider, but definitely Brisbane's home, and as I sort of got my family here, and I've done most of my recruitment career has been up here as well too. Though I spent a bit of time in Sydney with one of the organisations I work with, so it's got a bit of a soft spot for me. So
the last time I came, I was in Sydney, or sorry, not Sydney, but Brisbane. I'm gonna say it was 9 years ago, and I was fresh off the farm in Gympie, after doing 3 months picking beans, and I was as skinny as a ray.
It's made yeah, it's probably Brisbane's probably changed quite a lot actually. It's even 8 years ago it's pretty small. It always had that reputation as a bit of a country town, but it's definitely yeah, there's definitely been a lot of change. It's quite a new city, so you know, a lot of new buildings and but very it's sort of they've sort of embraced that sort of cosmopolitan Melbourne style. You know, a lot of al fresco sort of new restaurants, and it's quite a good place to live now. It's actually you're seeing a lot of people come up from Sydney and Melbourne just because it's so expensive to live there. But yeah, definitely if you're coming from picking beans in Gympie, it's and even 8 or 9 years ago, it's probably a very different place these days.
Yeah, because one of anybody who's listening to this who hasn't spent time in Australia, you can go from winter to summer to spring just traveling in the one country. Like it was like -1 or something in Melbourne, and we went up and it was like balmy and hot in summertime in Brisbane, and like that really shocked us, and like we didn't realize that would be the case, and yeah, it was just a cool enough. It was a cool enough city back then, but you could see it was still a bit.
No, well, that's it. Well, we've got Lime scooters now, so that's the you know that's the benchmark of being a hip and happening town, I think. No, yeah, you know, it's good actually. There's a lot of development happening, and you know, we've got a pretty big. They're building quite a large casino, which is sort of injecting quite a bit of infrastructure into the city, and we haven't got all the you know, they're talking about light rail and things like that, but it's a pretty easy city to get around, and so no, it's good. It's and you know, from a business perspective, it's not a place where a lot of companies headquarter, but there are a lot of the government here has done a lot around sort of investing in becoming sort of a bit of a smart technology startup sort of hub. So the types of you know, it's bringing up a lot of creatives and sort of technologists. You know, it's not Silicon Valley or anything like that by any means, but you know, it's definitely got a good sort of energy, which is good. So sort of yeah, I've seen it evolve. You know, yeah, the recruitment market, you know, and just the city evolve. It's been a really positive thing. So so it'll be home for a while. So that's
yeah, good stuff. And you had a proper sales introduction to your professional life. I see you started at Telstra doing the voice over IP sales. That's, for anybody who's not aware, that's a hard enough entry into the commercial world.
Yeah, no, I was always a bit of a tech geek. So I sort of, you know, my work during school, I worked at the sort of local computer store and things like that. So I'm probably still a bit of a geek that toils away at the middle of the night working on all kinds of weird and wonderful things. But so I started with Telstra doing sort of I got a sort of a contract job in there, and it was more actually on the technical side. I sort of started in there, and that sort of it was doing sort of projects for what was originally, it's sort of the beginning of cloud. It was called sort of it wasn't even VoIP. It was sort of called IP WAN, which is a pretty old technology, but it's sort of private cloud essentially. And so yeah, that was really good. And then I sort of wanted to. I would always go out. I was a technical guy that would always go out with the sales guys, and yeah, they seemed to have the most fun. So I always felt like I was missing out. So I sort of tried to move more into the sales and did pre-sales and stuff like that with Telstra. So that's sort of how I got sort of went from sort of being a technical person into the sort of into the sales world. Was just yeah, sort of fear of missing out with all the
so many
yeah.
So many recruiters start in IT recruitment just so they can get into IT sales. You reversed the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah, like I'm sure we'll probably cover this, but I sort of fell into IT recruitment as you do, because I was in IT sales, and I was looking for opportunities, and I met obviously I met a person who's a good friend mate of mine now, but at the time for a job, and he sort of immediately started doing the hard pitch to sort of get into IT recruitment, which I didn't do straight away. I really liked that was Hudson when I was Hudson years and years ago. yeah, I sort of did my due diligence, and I wasn't sure, and I jumped into another IT sales role, and luckily the company went. Well, I shouldn't say luckily, but the writing was on the wall, and they were sort of starting to have some issues, and I went back to that recruiter, and he was like, "Well, we're still looking for somebody." So, and then 12 months later, I bit the bullet and jumped into recruitment. So, yeah.
And people over here won't know the scale of Hudson back then in Australia, but easily the third or fourth largest
Well, it was
firm.
the original. So when I got there, it was so it was 2007. So I think they'd sort of gone through. It used to be the Morgan and Banks, which Morgan and Banks was sort of like the one of the recruitment companies in Australia. I suppose most sort of senior recruiters, and you look at sort of a lot of the executives that sort of float around the market now. They've all probably did some time at Morgan and Banks, which then sort of became got bought by a US company called TMP Worldwide, which then merged with Monster, and then became Hudson eventually. And so Hudson was huge. I know that it's probably they did a management buyout a couple of maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where the Australian or the Asia Pac guys bought the company from the US, sort of NASDAQ listed company.
Oh, really? I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
that.
So most of those, I sort of obviously still know most of those guys in that senior end, and so that made a lot of sense. So they've divested, but they were huge. They were probably sort of second or third, behind your Hayes, and but yeah, in Australia, well, to give you some scale, when I started there, this is pre-GFC at Hudson in Brisbane, which is still a small town. It's probably about 130 people in there, and mainly consultants essentially. So
wow, that's a lot. That's an unbelievable.
Well, yeah, you don't
amount,
really get that scale in anywhere now. I think a lot of companies
would they have 40 now?
in there. I don't know. I probably that's probably a good question for somebody that works there. I've been out of there for quite a while. They got some really good people there, and I know I still, but I probably see them, particularly these days with family and things like that, less and less these days. So, but yeah, definitely still a player in that sort of multidisciplinary business lines of service, that sort of space, which is sort of where I sort of moved sort of away from over the last couple of years. So, but
so you were in Hudson. Was it? What's the culture like in there? Is it a high performing culture? I always assumed it was a wee bit softer than Walters and Page and
you know
Hayes.
what? I think I like, so I can only comment sort of on my experience. When I got in there, it was very much a really high performing team when I got in there. I was in an IT team, and I think that was kind of it was good from that baptism of fire perspective. And I sort of still to this day probably really look back on that time as quite fondly, in terms of the team was very good. Everyone was performing well. When I got in there, I think within the first couple of weeks, they all went for their sort of annual conference, and most of the team made it. And I because I was new, I didn't get to go, and that missing out on that again. For people that know me, I've got probably a big sense of fear of missing out, which I think is a good. Which is a good thing in recruitment, because you sort of it keeps you intellectually curious, and you want to get involved, and I think it can help with your motivation to sort of, people are motivated by money and things like that. And I'd probably say money is a nice addition, but for me it was sort of being part of something. And so being part of that team where I sort of missed out, that sort of was a driver to sort of make sure I made that the following year, and then the subsequent years after that. So, but yeah, good culture. Look, it went through a lot of changes. I started probably, I started in November of 2007, and by sort of maybe June, July 2008, we were well and truly into starting to feel the impact of the GFC. Obviously, it probably hit. I know it hit the UK and the likes of the US and other markets a lot sooner. Queensland, where I was, Australia was shielded. We didn't actually go into recession, but
you were all given £1,000 to buy TVs, weren't you?
yeah, and nobody did that.
That was the government
debt down, so it didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, the government. We're pretty we were beneficiaries of a pretty buoyant resources market, oil and gas projects starting to come online. So we felt it, and trust me, it was pretty dark times in there. But Hudson were pretty proactive around how they dealt with that, and again, it's very easy to reflect on your times and think about sort of the negative times, but the positive that was, rather than get rid of a lot of people like some other companies did, like overnight, they went to everybody. Hey, look, we can do this if everybody takes sort of a 10%. Essentially looked at ways of cutting 10% from the wage cost. So whether that meant going down to an 8-day sort of fortnight or a 9-day fortnight, or salary packaging some leave, or doing that. So most people did that, and they managed to keep quite a few and a lot of good people through that. So
but you're well back in business by 2010 when the rest of the world was.
Yeah, that's right. We came, and that's right. And so that's and that was probably my I'll be honest, it was pretty grim. I'm sure my manager had probably a chat with me a couple of times about motivation and things like that during the.
It's tough. It's tough when you're having to make calls and that there's nothing really on the other end of the line that's going to be positive.
To give and I talk about this I've talked about this to consultants that I've managed before, or even just sort of when I'm talking to other recruiters, like pre-GFC. We used to have our system. You could have 20 jobs on your job sheet before it sort of, you have to click over to go to the next page. And I sort of always had a bit of an anxiety. If I didn't have a second page, I'd always have a bit of an anxiety. So that's pre-GFC. Obviously, it was pretty crazy. And I don't think we've ever really seen it. Even though the economy's got back and we're doing quite well now, I don't think it's ever really got that crazy. But because it was also immature.
Was it not pretty sweet in 2011?
Oh no, yeah, it was definitely buoyant, but I think it was a different
impacts and stuff.
Yeah, it was definitely buoyant, but it was a different kind of buoyancy. I think coming into the GFC, there was a lot of that early days of sort of internal recruitment function. So it was less of that prior. What happened is that started to get built just before the GFC and sort of fell over. So when it sort of did come back, there was a lot more maturity around internal capabilities. So there was a lot more recruiters that were an agency that then went out internal and set up those structures. So I think whilst a lot of people did well, there was a lot of people that sort of, just sort of trod water, I should say. And because there was, that was a bit of a time for the market to sort of find itself, and companies trying to work out how to build these functions internally, and so yeah, it was it was buoyant, but it wasn't the same sort of it wasn't the heady sort of the good old days, as they sort of always say. But I don't know how good they were. That's
Because so in 2007 when you started, like that, people look back in recruitment terms from Brisbane and Perth, and they're like, that'll never come back. Like that was once in a generation of a boom. But I recruited in 2011 and 12, and that was that felt to me like an unbelievable boom in Perth, and Brisbane had a similar thing. And a lot of it was due to the fact that whenever these mining projects or oil and gas projects are on the go, you only have a certain amount of time to get the stuff out of the ground and make it happen. So they just go gangbusters on hiring.
That's right.
Don't they?
But the counterpoint to that would probably be that and working, and by that sort of point, I'd sort of started to move into sort of the management roles and having a bit more oversight, sort of particularly in those multidisciplinary sort of recruitment agencies. It's very easy to sort of sit there as to be in a market space that's very buoyant and look at things with rose-colored glasses, and then not really see the person next to you in a market that's probably not, through fault of their own or through the structure of the business or trying to service a certain market. There were definitely people that was, because there were markets that weren't as buoyant. We for every oil and gas company, the retail sector was definitely struggling. So if you're were recruiting in a retail sector, there were still the financial services sectors only really sort of started to the last couple of years have been quite good for it, but So that, there were, so for every, and that's right, for every,
I think a lot of them moved to Sydney and
that's
Melbourne,
right.
didn't
And
they?
for every,
Like they moved a lot of their
for every Queensland and Perth in the, the buoyant mining boom days, there was a South Australia that, where they were, they were struggling quite a lot. So it is really, I think, it's the ability to sort of move with the markets and things like that is probably, how you sort of obviously survive. But yeah, I agree. Like at the moment, the economy is probably as good as I've seen it in since probably the GFC up here in Brisbane, sort of within the market that I operate. But I have no doubts that there's probably somebody that's probably listening to this or sitting in the market going, oh, okay, well, isn't it? that's not my story. That's not how I feel. So,
yeah, no. So, what age were you when you started managing people?
So I would have been, so it would have been around 2010, 2011. So, what are we? So what's that? That's 9 years ago. So I'm about 20, 24, 25, say. So reasonably young.
Has your style changed?
Well, my style's changed a lot now.
Since then?
I don't really manage anyone. I manage myself, so I would say on a day-to-day basis.
Are you tough on yourself?
Yeah, I'm a pretty easygoing manager these days. I've definitely taken some time to reflect on myself. I'd say, definitely. I think when you go into management as a young person, and you don't know what you're doing, and upon sort of reflection, I'd say I probably was very much I could do this, I did this well, why can't you do that? Why can't, and without probably understanding the intricacies and the challenges for that person. I think that's every sort of manager. You go with that very directive management style, and it's sort of you just I think that's sort of something that evolved.
So you got more empathy over time.
Look, as a when you sort of start out in the recruitment leadership path, it's an interesting one in the sense that sort of you generally will get promoted because you're doing well, not because you're a good leader, or you're demonstrating those capabilities. And I think recruitment generally has, and I assume it would be a global thing, but I think we're very good at sort of supporting the people that do well in terms of making them feel good and making sure that we're protecting our sort of our top billers, but sometimes we move them into leadership roles where they shouldn't be. And I've worked with people that are great recruiters but terrible leaders, and at some point I think when I sort of started out, I wouldn't have been a great leader at all. Maybe I've never been, I guess, but it's you definitely I think you got promoted for what you did rather than sort of your potential. I think that was a very common sort of occurrence within recruitment. So I think changing that style to actually have empathy is probably a big thing that I sort of probably had to learn, particularly as I took on bigger teams and sort of geographically dispersed teams and people that were significantly older than me or more experienced. You sort of really got to adjust your styles, and it's but you're always learning. I think from moving out of where I was running, big teams to sort of, doing my own business, it gave me a lot of time to reflect and sort of look at where I sort of made mistakes and where I think, you could have always done something a bit better, or, having some self-reflection is always a really valuable thing, I think.
Sure it is. You moved on to Davidson. Obviously you're a young guy. You're well known in the city. You've probably got the best database going. How did they manage to whisper in your ear to get you across? What was the big
to be honest,
is it a good step up?
No, it definitely was. I think I was doing pretty well at Hudson. I was probably I think I was one of the top billers nationally by the time I'd left, but I was probably a little bit unfulfilled in the sense that I didn't think there was a lot of, I'd sort of wanted to, there were things I wanted to do within recruitment. Again, one of the things I sort of, that I was really passionate about was sort of specialization, and we were sort of in an account management. And I think there was nothing wrong with the organisation, and the reason I left Hudson, I left on good terms, and I think it's a good organisation. I've always been grateful for what I learnt there. It was a sort of formative years for me. But yeah, no, Davidson sort of came out as a bit of an opportunity, bit of a chance opportunity, a referral from a friend, and it was a long conversation. It was sort of a long sort of courting period. We, Rob Davidson, who's very well known in Brisbane, and he's quite both the Davidson brothers are very impressive guys who are very sort of they're able to a lot of very charismatic, and just genuinely come across as very, very good operators, very good guys. So talking to Rob for a bit of a longer term, they'd had an IT division sort of within their corporate services for quite a while, and they'd sort of never really scaled it. They'd had sort of 2 to 4 consultants at any given point. That had a couple of managers, and those were all good people. A lot of those guys went on to do bigger and better things. I just think it was just never really. It was just part of the corporate structure, so which included like HR, accounting. They didn't really have it as a standalone discipline. So I guess the conversation I just sort of had with them was to take that out and move from particularly one of the things that I really wanted to do, having been in an account sort of management structure where you sort of look after a whole range of roles within an account, which worked for me because I was reasonably technical, but I saw an opportunity to sort of really hammer into that, the likes of the Hazes and things like that, very successful for a reason. But I also got a lot of satisfaction out of, I was very good at filling, say, software developers, and not so good at filling other roles. But
I find that myself as
and
well.
you do obviously in an account structure, you do everything you have to do, because that's the. But and I think there wasn't, it's always for me. I think the thing I always really big thing of value that I sort of do is that if we're going to go to a client, know what you're talking about, or at least have an interest in the space to actually learn it and take it in. And I think it can be hard being a jack of all and managing all these different things to really truly ever be that. So they were quite open to that idea and strategy. They were keen to grow. It's a successful company, well established. They had a good client base. It was just about leveraging. So it was just a back and forward conversation over about 3 or 4 months. And yeah, look, it was just that it was a step up, definitely. But I really bought into the guys. They were very, and they were pretty, they were very bought into what sort of I had to say. So I think it worked out really well. And so I joined those guys.
What was the head count when you joined?
Well, there's a lot happened in this time. That's probably the biggest role I sort of probably would have had in the corp.
Because we had the crash during.
There was a dip. So yeah, there was a dip. But again, that was tied to. Look, again, IT was pretty robust. So again, it goes back to that point. For some people were hurting more than others. And I think it's But so probably it was around it was about 3 or 4 when I got there. So 2 sort of rookies, sort of graduates, and 2 sort of established recruiters who sort of had been there for a long time, sort of very embedded in the business. And then look, by the time I left, now I will say, like, my team when I left was probably around 12 or 13 in Brisbane, but in the midst of that, we got technology up to a point where the business ended up looking at an investment and bought a company called ITCOM in, I think, around 2011. Oh, I don't know. About 2014 or 13. I can't remember the dates exactly, but so then that brought over a whole range of so by the time I left the business, there would have been about 60, 65 or 70 odd people across Melbourne, Sydney, New Zealand, Brisbane. Now I wasn't in charge of that. Damien Ross, who was the CEO of ITCOM, came on and took that, and so And it was that was a really rewarding experience, I think. Look, they're merging companies and changing and merging cultures. I think they'd be the first to admit we probably butted heads quite a bit around differences of style, but they were really they're positive guys, and there were tough times, and but I think
it's fair to say Davidson are a large boutique.
Yeah, I'd say they sort of definitely operate in that mid-market. Again, I've been out for a few years now, so again, you'd probably want to speak to somebody that's there to say that what their strategies and where they sit. But I think they definitely play in that mid-market. And they've got some really strong disciplines. The technology team now is very strong here in government and contracting, which is sort of when I left, we left on differences of direction and things like that. But I still talk pretty regularly to Rob, and I think the direction that they wanted to go was probably not where I wanted to go, and it was probably it's like it's like when you're in a relationship, you're both going different ways, and you both realize that you both realize it. So it was. I think at the time it was probably difficult when we were both leaving, but we both. I think that all parties have sort of found their way, and I think they've got a really strong contracting business now. So I'd definitely say they play in that sort of major accounts. They do very well in government here now. From what I sort of still know, very different. Very different to the business that I worked on the focus of working with smaller, more very perm focused business. Whilst my business now is probably quite heavily contract focused. Funnily enough, it is with smaller niche companies. And
talk to me about the day that you decided to set up your own company.
Yeah, cool. Look, it's something that always been sort of bubbling away. I went and worked with one of my good mates, Kieran O'Donnell, with a company called Just Digital People for 12 months. Look, we sort of were pretty eyes open around sort of whether or not that was going to be working with your mates and working with people that it's always going to be I enjoyed the experience there. I probably made a few mistakes in being a bit too a bit too palsy and sort of coming out of quite a big and sort of stressful environment into something that was sort of a bit more fast moving and a bit more aloof. It took a while for me to sort of adjust to that, but I saw what those guys were doing, and I thought, well, I can, this is the opportunity coming into the new year. So when I started, it was sort of December when I decided, and I started in February. I took a couple of months off, which was good, and so it was just a bit of a it was to not get too emotional into it. I was coming back from a meeting in Sydney with Just Digital People pitching for a panel. My grandfather at the time was terminally ill and sitting in the hospital, and I was going to go home. I was going to jump in I was going to do this meeting, fly down to Sydney, get on a plane, go back and spend the afternoon with him, and and obviously trying to please every master really. The flight got delayed. We had storms. I sat on the plane for 4 hours. I didn't get home till 11 o'clock at night. I still managed to get to the hospital, and he passed away that next morning. So I got to spend the evening with him. But it was kind of that. It was just sort of like I'm running around for this. I'm maybe it's time for me to really reflect. And obviously I've been, by this time I'd sort of been doing recruitment for around 10 years. So it was just a bit of a.
And you've been on a busy.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff had happened sort of within my sort of personal purview. My father passed away in the preceding sort of 2 years. So there was a lot of stuff that was going on in the background that sort of moved me to sort of move. Well, maybe I need to. I've been managing other people, and when you've got teams of 12 or 13 people, you spend a lot of time. You're really dealing with a lot of other people's problems. So the first year I took it as an experiment. We've been, my partner and I have been pretty sensible and with putting our investments and things like that. So I sort of knew what I needed as a bit of a runway to to do it. But there was a bit of a, as I said,
What did you think it would take?
Look, my view, and I still say this, I think if you're as good as you think you are, then you should be able to generate revenue within. You should be able to get the business to, if you run it sensibly, of course. You should be able to, within the first 3 months, because you've got your first month of going around knocking on doors, you've got your second month of chasing, filling work, and then you've got your sort of third month of chasing your invoices. So if you can't start to generate some revenue, but it comes down to your individual circumstances as well too. So if you've got 3 mortgages,
I would probably say for you, yes, 3 months, no problem. For most people, 6 months. Like you've got 10 years of equity.
That's
in the local market.
Yeah. And look, if I was setting up in a different market like a Sydney or somewhere like that, I would say probably even longer again. It's just, again, it's sort of, I think to go and do it yourself, you do really need to stop. Like, as I said, the decision was probably, there was that sort of, that spark, as I was driving to the hospital, I called my partner and said, I'd call my boss and said, look, yep, we're done. And it was fine, that we worked really well, and we're still, really good mates. But likewise, and we compete definitely, but we've got very different businesses. But then likewise, I called my partner and said I'm doing this, and so that was a bit of a, laissez-faire sort of a decision process. But then the actual planning and things like that, that was something that had always been back in mind, but also, something I've sort of do. I do like the data and the facts, and I'm a bit of a stickler for that kind of stuff. So I think you do have to go in with the eyes wide open. I think again, it's like the best biller becoming a manager. Just because you're a great biller doesn't mean you'll be a good business owner. So it's you've got to seek that advice, and and that couple of months I took off, I went and sought advice and talked to people, and got that.
What type of conversations?
With other business owners, other people that have done similar things around sort of, the risks. Probably not so much the risks, but sort of, what are the systems, what are the processes? Some people literally, when I was talking to some business owners, they were running off, off their Outlook, and that's it. That's their database is Outlook, and and their mobile phone. And other people were a lot more structured, and so it was really around finding where I sort of, what kind of person was I, and what kind of business did I want to run, and what did I want to get out of it, and I think the first year I sort of made a commitment. I wanted to have a focus on just not having too much of a concern around sort of what I would deliver, but focusing on the quality of the work that I was doing, which meant sort of saying no to a lot of stuff. Even though you probably do slip into that thing of taking on stuff because you get worried where the next invoice is going to come from and things like that. But really trying to do that, but also spending time at home and traveling as well. Look, there is a lifestyle component. I think recruitment can create a really good, healthy lifestyle. Like obviously having a kid now, the flexibility I've got, I get to spend more time than a lot of my friends and things like that with and they're the things that are important to me. As I said,
Did you know that? Did you know that when you were starting it out? Did you know that, or did you discover that?
No, I definitely discovered it. I've had this conversation with a couple of people around growing, and I've had conversations with people. The brand that I sort of wanted to build within what I'm doing now has been really sort of, I've been passionate around being boutique, being very special. You're dealing with trading on my experience. So if I was to go and hire somebody, to go and hire a graduate or somebody that's just come out of school or or some kind of sales environment, throwing them in. Wouldn't be very true to my brand. And I think a lot of people do that because they see the opportunities there. And, I've missed out on a lot of opportunities, definitely. But I've worked the ones I wanted to work. And that's probably been a sense of satisfaction that I get. I'd say no to clients, politely, most of the time. But also, I'm trying to find some self-worth in the recruitment processes again as well. I think that's something that when the mark times are better, there's bodies flying around and, that like there's a lot. Everyone wants to hire people and make the opportunities. It makes it it does make it very commoditized, and there isn't and a lot of people, a lot of recruiters, you talk to them, don't necessarily see the value in themselves in terms of the quality of service that they're actually delivering. They see that the client treats them as a transactional. It's a grudge purchase.
Without hiring, how can you make more?
Look, to be honest, this year I focused on contract growth. I have explored looking at other partners. I've had I've had a couple of people approach me around sort of taking on the business as well, which is interesting. But it's been it's sort of something. I still think I've got a lot more to do with this, and so I will grow. I will grow. But for me, it's around sort of staying true to what I'm offering my clients. I again as well too. For me, this has been a pretty transformational year in the sense that I've got my little one, which is and the ability to have that flexibility is a great thing. And I think I'd encourage it if you've got experience. I've got a couple of friends that are senior recruiters in the market that have been toying with it. The ones that I think have the business savvy to pull it off. I've been encouraging them to maybe look at it. Likewise, I've talked to a couple about potentially, coming in, and it's one of those things for me. It's I think that's where the growth opportunity is. But there's also, depends what your motivation is. If you want to own them.
Yeah, and look, I ask these questions because I ask these questions of myself all the time as well, and sometimes I do get envy. When you interview, like when I interviewed Safe from Digital Gurus, he said to me on the phone, "Oh, how big are you guys now?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, same as when I spoke 2-3 years ago." And he's had an exit since. So I'm like, and then it's hard not to kind of beat yourself up on that. You're like, does he really know more than me? Is he more capable than me? And then you kind of think, well, he's actually done the work and he's strategized it the right way, but he's definitely made a good decision early on to go in that direction.
I agree.
So I wrestle with this stuff all the time.
And one of the other things I've sort of picked up whilst I've been doing my own recruitment business has actually been doing consulting within other recruitment companies. So that's been a little bit of an interesting aside that I've done here and there. Not a lot, but I've got a couple of clients where I built some systems and technology in the background, and I've got a few other things sort of I'm bubbling away on and working on that will probably create revenue for me. And recruitment is that great enabler. And so I think it's one of the, I guess, for all the hard times and all the self-pitying, it's probably one of the best jobs in the world, really, when you think about the amount of opportunity that it can offer you if you stick it.
If you can manage your own ego.
Yeah, that's it. And I've had an ego, don't worry, and I probably still do. But I probably, one of the things I sort of when I left and sort of went out into the wilderness on my own is I sort of I stopped worrying about what the other companies were doing, recruitment's one of those funny industries where we love to tear each other down.
Australia is terrible for that compared to anywhere else.
It's probably more Australia. There is it's a bizarre.
Let me tell you from my perspective. Okay, so I only work with the best UK recruiters that want to move abroad, and everybody wants them. So, and I can't always get them, but when I get them, we'll give them 5 options generally, and these companies, they all know each other. They've all started out together. They all drink in the same bars. And they hammer each other in the process. It is, and it doesn't happen to me anywhere else in the world except Australia.
It's a funny. Look. There is a
sports done to the sports culture.
I don't know. Australia has always had a really bad tall poppy syndrome sort of culture anyway. But I think it's weirdness a little bit. Like, there is that toxic element of people sort of deride pleasure out of seeing somebody not succeed, which is something that sort of, and I've probably been guilty of that at some points, and probably will continue to be at some points. And I find you need to probably put that in check. And I think when you are out on your own, you still sort of do one of the I guess again probably going back to your question about how do you derive more. One of the things I've definitely been a big proponent of here is creating networks within other operators. So there are other IT recruiters that work in the same space as me that we will work across roles, or we will give each other assistance and support. We've created a good network within that sort of space. I've got
I have that in Rec as well.
I think working in some of the bigger, I think that culture comes out of some of the bigger competitive agencies where I think there is a lot of competition internally with each other.
They foster
it, because I think there's been times when I was in those bigger agencies where another team, particularly if you're competing, another team, a deal falls over and your team's better, rather than looking at you do better for the quarter, rather than looking at the greater good, which would be, wow, the business is doing it. That really would have helped the business, and that money would have gone into investing in A, B, or C. You kind of get a little bit of, you get a little bit of a selfish pleasure out of it. So I think that's something that, stepping out and in reflection now is something that I probably was guilty of, but I think, I've tried to, I'm not sort of like, new age guru here, but I think it's more around sort of, building those relationships. And so there is a good collective of good recruiters that sort of will work with each other, and we'll go to the pub, and, that's one of the things I always sort of encouraged, well, probably not encouraged, but just did by proxy was, I did enjoy beer, and I always made sure to make friends with people in other recruitment companies. And when that came time to hire, particularly like in Davidson, where I was really scaling up, most of those first, and I say that even at Just Digital People, most of the hires that I brought in were experienced people that had known me for years, that had a beer with me, that understood my values, and knew that, and there was a trust there. We didn't have to go through the, we went through rec to recs, but we didn't have to go through that sort of cycle of, oh, well, we don't know, are they telling the truth? We'd done 50 interviews at the pub over a 5-year span, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, and that's the great thing about having equity in a local marketplace like you have.
So, and I think, I think the value of I think if you're not looking, if you're going to be like I am, about really fussy around sort of who and what who I want to bring in and what I sort of want to be, probably at the detriment to the growth of my business in some aspects. I have to be, but I'm comfortable when I'm comfortable with that. But to, building those networks, that's been quite, it's been financially quite beneficial for me. That it's probably added a couple of $100,000 worth of revenue of GP to my bottom line over the course of 12 months. So, I encourage people to build those networks. I've got great client relationships, and they are looking for something else. I won't do it. I won't just jump in and pick up a role that I don't do, but I've introduced another partner, and we've worked out a fee split, and then the client's got that benefit of, that's the one thing I would say is, within Brisbane, it was very much PSAs, and, every big client I've probably ever worked with, most of my clients that I work with now are all big clients. They've all got teams, they're all in that sort of, I've got a lot of smaller startups, which are fun, and I really enjoy working with those guys because you get to be part of their growth trajectory. But I've got some big blue chip clients, and I would have thought 5 years ago it would have been impossible for a solo operator to work in there, and I think that's kind of where the market's gone. Is that there is value. I'm not negotiating down on fees now. I'm actually negotiating up in a lot of instances. I'm not sort of getting beaten over the head. Standard terms are. I had a client, a company who I'd been working with for a long time, 10 years, who I wasn't on the panel with, grabbed my terms and conditions off my email signature and just signed the contract. And so, there was no negotiation. So, there's value in that sort of, I think there is an opportunity for smaller operators now more than there was, because technology is changing as well too. And companies are technology and the ability to get across, and people want to, the way I sort of equate it is like, when you go get coffee, you go to like a little boutique coffee place, you want that experience. A lot of people are buying experiences now. They want that, they're happy to pay a little bit more, or they're happy to, I think that recruitment can sort of creep into that space a little bit as well too. So, we are very, I'd say, if I was in a mid-tier or recruitment company, rather than your biggest competitor being another mid-tier, it's probably all of the little operators that are sort of nibbling away at the broader picture. So it's an interesting space at the moment.
That's cool, because that wasn't always the way with Australia.
No.
It definitely wasn't when I was there, like before. So it's really cool that let's be honest, it takes Australia a little bit to catch up with what happens in America or the UK.
Right. And look, it could all change, and it could all change. And I think if you the one thing that working in recruitment's taught me is that you've kind of been on your toes for everything to just completely, best laid plans. If things can change within an instant, so you've got the we talk about resilience, and I won't use the painful analogies that get thrown around, but you've got the resilience factor is probably a big. You either got to be really good at what you do, or have a great work ethic with a lot of resilience, or everything.
Both, all of
three.
All of them.
But yeah, it's. But again, I think it's it's served me well. All of the organisations that I've worked in, for good or bad, and I'm sure you could ask them. They'll have good stories about me, bad stories about me. I learned something, and I got a lot of value from that. So I think. And trying, in my own little way, working with other people in smaller markets and doing stuff there. That's kind of, how I think, I sort of, I do my own thing, but I hope that sort of maybe moving the industry sort of to a bit of a better place. You'd hope, with having a bit more companies, seeing the value, because it has been, it can be quite transactional.
So, to finish up, Aaron, you've learned a lot in the last 3 years from setting up your own business and implementing things, and you've gone into some other businesses out there and shared some of your experiences from your big business experience and from what you've learned. If somebody came to you tomorrow and they said, okay, I want to set up my own company, what should I do? What should I do first? And what should I do second, third, fourth? And what does that look like over the first few months until I can get revenue on the board? What advice would you give them?
I would say don't get excited and try and do everything at once. I see a lot of people that try and go out and build this crazy brand and pick everything and try and sort of be everything to everyone. Pick a space, pick something that you're good at. Have good people to lean on. So, if you're going to start up your own business, make sure you've got a good accountant who's setting you up for the future. You don't make sure that you are starting to think about systems. I'm a big believer in, having a good database, and, it's not so much, for searching, but just for managing your time, particularly as a small business owner. Your time is every second of your time is worth something. So how you can optimize and automate and streamline. So it's thinking about those things. How can you maximize your time to get out to see your clients, do the resourcing. So just have a bit of a plan around sort of what that's going to look like, I think, is probably the biggest thing. I think you can just get caught up in the excitement. So yeah, you just want to have good people that you can lean on, whether they be mentors or advisors, or even service providers. You know what I mean? As I said, I've got a good accountant who has sort of set me up and done, he was referred from another friend of mine that has a recruitment company. So it's just doing that planning and just doing what your strengths are. If you'd be happy to say no to stuff, and don't get too stressed that the next opportunity isn't going to come, because if you sort of stick to what you're good at, you'll generally you'll have a more compelling argument to the client, and you'll deliver quicker. And that's kind of that'd probably be that encapsulated, I'd say.
Good man, Aaron. Well, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. Sounds like you're doing great stuff.
Great idea. Great idea, mate. It's good. I've been listening to them, and it's really interesting to hear so many different global perspectives. And I'm only in this little small part of the world called Brisbane, but yeah, I think there's a lot of commonality from what I've sort of from the conversations I've been listening to. So keep up the good work, mate.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Take care.
Cheers. I'll see you. Thanks, mate. Bye.
Well, a massive thank you to Aaron for coming on the podcast and sharing his story, his values, and some tips and tricks and how you can get your own business up and running. It's worked for him. He's obviously had 10 years of good equity built into a marketplace where he knows all the clients, he knows all the candidates. So he's managed to set up and have a great little practice for himself. And I thought it was interesting that he does a lot of split placements to the sum that it's added quite a lot of revenue to his business with other recruitment entrepreneurs. And also that, you know, he may scale in the future, but he doesn't feel he has to, because recruitment allows him to potentially channel his entrepreneurial tendencies into setting up other businesses and advising other recruitment agencies. So I thought he was a really interesting guest, and I hope we can get more people from Brisbane, from Perth, and from Sydney and Melbourne on, because I love Australia and I miss it. And I just love, it brings me back there every time I get to speak to somebody, especially if they're in IT recruitment like I was. So we'll be back on later on today with another great guest. I might put out a little podcast as well on advisors and getting an advisor, just from what I've learned here. And sometimes I throw out advice here to people in conversations, and I don't want that to be seen as blanket advice for everybody. So I think I might just structure something just in case I'm not saying the right thing and people are picking up on something. Okay, so that'll be it. Later on today. Talk soon.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.